Hello everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel of Arjuna Farms. In today's video, I'd be sharing details on how to make ceramic pleco caves. The same method can be used to make other ceramic accessories for aquarium like caves for dwarf cichlids, hiding spots for shrimps, etc. I would like to highlight that I have built 100 plus caves so far and many of my plecos are breeding in these caves. You can also build condos, multi-layer caves using the same process. I would like to share that it took me around a year and a half to understand how these cave needs to be built. I did a lot of online research, went through documents and videos shared by experts to come to a conclusion on how to build these caves. I have failed n number of times and now I feel confident on sharing that how this can be done in a very efficient way. So if you like this video, kindly press the like button, and if you want similar content in future, kindly subscribe to my channel. Now the question you might have is whether I should DIY it or should I buy it from the market. Let me help you out there. So this process would need effort and time, hence I would request if you need the number of caves in higher numbers, then definitely go ahead with this. If you need in smaller numbers like 2 or 5 caves, I would say that go and buy from the market. If you need to do some pilot testing of custom designs, you can definitely try out this process. Or if you want to try with different size of caves which is not available in your area or market, then I think you can go ahead and start building your own pleco caves. Now there are different methods through which you can build any ceramic items. The first method is the extrusion method. In this, the clay is placed in a hollow tube and pressed hard to take the desired output shape. Now this process needs expertise, needs specific equipments. It's less flexible as we can't make any shape from this extrusion model, and then this can be used for mass production. The next one is the traditional method of using wheel for creating pots. For this one, you need trained skills or you need experience on working on such process. This is again a less flexible one because some designs you can't create using this one. You can use this process for mass production, and the time spent to create one cave or one item is very less in this process. And the next method is the slip casting process. I feel this is the easiest one from the others, as this don't need any special skills or equipments. For this process, a plaster mold is created and that's used to create any ceramic items. So in my video, I'll be walking you through in detail how to do a slip casting process. And as I said, this is easy to build. You can make any designs from this process and you don't need any special equipment. Also, the slip casting process can be done in two types of mold. One is single plaster mold and another one is a split plaster mold. Now you might be curious that what plaster mold I should use while you are creating your own pleco caves or any decorations. So let me help you there. So if you are planning to make small caves for any hyphen plecos or any small caves, then I generally use single molds very extensively for those. If you're planning to make big caves for L25 or any such plecos where the caves are long, then I would highly recommend using split molds because of the length of those caves. Again, if you are making any intricate statues or any decorations where there are corners, I would highly recommend using split molds. In this video, I'd be covering the single molds in detail and would give a very top level overview for the split molds, but I would be also sharing links in description which you can refer, which would share more knowledge about split molds. So what you see here is the detailed list of materials needed to build the Pleco caves. I'll be talking about each one of them in detail in the subsequent slides. Plaster of Paris, also called as POP. Now these are very easily available at hardware shops. They come in different package sizes, 3 kg, 5 kg, 20 kgs, etc. Now I buy generally 20 kg bag if I know that I need to make multiple molds in a day. You would need approximately 3 to 4 kgs for a small size mold and around 6 to 8 kg for building a big size mold. Now again, it depends upon how big you are building your mold. One quick tip which I would like to give is make sure to use the plaster once you open the bag, or keep it very airtight, because I have observed if you don't keep it airtight, the plaster would catch moisture and it would get spoiled. Now let's talk about clay, which is the regular pottery clay. I would recommend buying a powdered clay. Now buying powder is much easier to make a clay solution than buying a clay cube and trying to dissolve it in water. Now these clay come in different colors: brown, white, grey, etc. Obviously the brown is cheaper, white and grey are a little expensive compared to brown. Make sure to buy terracotta or earthenware clay. Don't buy porcelain or any other type, because it won't serve the purpose. So each and every clay have a different firing range temperature. So I would recommend to keep a track of whatever clay you're buying, what is the firing range temperature. That would help you while you're baking the clay item. If you're from India, I would mention a website link in the description which would help you to buy the clay from. The website is very user friendly and it mentions all the details very clearly on the portal. Kindly note, I am not affiliated to the website. I am just sharing the place from where I order my clay from. Mold box. What exactly is a mold box? A mold box is basically, any item or anything you use to keep the plaster together while you're performing the casting process. If you want to make a lot of molds, I would highly recommend making 4 pieces of wood as shown here in L shape. That's the best way of making a mold box. Basically, you take this 4 wood L shapes and clamp them together. That's your mold box is ready. Now the next question that might come in your mind is, what should be the dimension of this L shape? So I ideally keep 2 inches, 1.5 to 2 inches of plaster layer around whatever item I'm planning to make. So let's take an example. We are making a 1-inch cube cave. So the size of this box could be 2 inches plaster, 1-inch cave, and then 2 inches plaster. So my length would be 5 inches, my breadth would be 5 inches since it's cube, and the height would be 2 inches plaster and then 1-inch cube. So basically it would be 3 inches. So the size would be 5 into 5 into 3 LBH. Now this might sound a little too technical, but when I would show you the demo, it would clear your doubts. Now just sharing as an FYI that for single mold you would need the height more, because we are trying to make all the mold in one single block. And for the split mold, the length would be more and the height would be less, as we are trying to make the casting or the mold into split pieces. I would also like to add that you get ready-made mold boxes too. In my area, I was only able to find a 15 centimeter cube mold box which was on Amazon, and this is used to make concrete cubes. So I have used this as my mold box. I make cichlid caves or shrimp caves using this 15 centimeter mold box. Now let's assume that you want to make only one mold and only for one size of cave, and you don't want to take the effort of making those wooden shapes and all, I would say you can also use any old buckets or bottles as a mold box, as it can hold the plaster together. But the bucket or the bottle would get spoiled after you make a mold, or you probably have to break it to take the plaster out, but you can definitely use it. C clamps or C shaped clamps. So if you're using those wooden planks or wooden L shaped to making a mold box, then only you would need C clamps. If you're using a ready-made mold box or a bucket or something as a mold box, then you won't need C clamps. You would need again 4 pieces of these to hold the wood L shape together. These are very easily available at hardware stores. I paid around 100 Indian rupees for each of these C clamps. So mold, or the cave model which needs to be casted. Now this is a very important topic because you can use different materials to make your cast model on which you would apply the plaster mold and create your cast. Now I would be sharing different models which I have used in the past. Now this is the wood one which I have recently used. You can make different shapes of mold using wood. The next is the clay, which kids use to make different items. You can use the same clay. So here you can see I have made one cave from clay. You can also use 3D printed model for casting purpose. The only thing is the plaster would stick very hard to the 3D printed filaments. So in the next slide I would show you how to mitigate that. You can also use your current existing cave as the mold or model for casting purpose, but again plaster would stick very strongly to the ceramic or to the terracotta, so you need to use mold release agent on that. You can also use PVC pipes as a model to build caves. In here you can see I have used a semicircle PVC pipe for a semicircular cave. You can use styrofoam also to build your cave models. This is also a best material if you have anything to design or build. You can definitely use this. Also the last one is coconut shells. Half of coconut shells can be used to make cichlid caves. I use them a lot to make any of my cichlid caves. Now what exactly is a mold release agent? So basically when we make mold and pour plaster on top of it, some materials stick so hard to the plaster that it's very difficult to remove them. So if you try force to remove that, then it either would spoil the mold, or the whole casting process goes for a toss. Hence the mold release agent is applied on the mold before pouring plaster on top of it. It creates a layer which helps that the mold doesn't stick to the plaster, and you can remove the mold very easily and you would get the shape as you want. So one of the most common used mold release which I've seen in many videos is using Murphy's oil soap. Now I've heard a lot of good reviews about this one. The only thing is I couldn't use this because I was not able to source it locally. It was available on Amazon India, but it was imported, so it was way expensive, so I didn't try this one yet. The second mold release is you get release agent on many hobby portals, which is built for used as a mold release agent. You can use that directly. Again, it's an expensive one and I was not able to find the right product, hence I have not used it yet. The third one which I've used is either use a Vaseline or some oil. Now I have mixed success with this one. Sometimes it works, sometimes it won't, but it depends upon how strong the bond is there between mold and plaster. So if the bond is weak, Vaseline works very well. Now for some objects like wood, metal or even the 3D printed parts, the plaster sticks very strongly to the mold. In those instances, what I do is I use a aluminum foil or thin plastic food wrap around the mold and then pour plaster so that there is no surface contact between the mold and the plaster, and I then can easily remove the mold out and then swirl the aluminum foil and pull it out, and you get the desired mold as you want. So that's what, as I said, I would use this instance where the plaster sticks very strongly to the mold, as wood, metal, or the 3D printed parts. I would also like to call out that if you're using clay or styrofoam as your mold material, these materials are very easy to remove from the plaster and they don't stick at all to the plaster, so it's very easy to remove or pull them out, and you don't need a release agent for them. Now the last section is miscellaneous items, which you would need while you're working on this project. The first thing I want to emphasize on is protective gear. You need eye goggles, face mask and gloves while working with plaster of Paris, as inhaled it could be hazardous to health. I would highly recommend doing this activity outdoors, as there might be dust from the plaster of Paris and clay. So I would highly recommend you should do this activity outdoors, and also it creates a lot of mess, so better to do it outdoors. You definitely need water while you're working on this project for making plaster of Paris, as well as making clay solution, and as well as cleaning the mess. Once this all is completed, you need a water source. The next item that you need would be the sandpaper. A low grade sandpaper would be needed when you make the caves and those are dried. You need to sand them off to remove any uneven surface. The next item what you need is basic clay tools. These are available very cheap on Amazon, around 200 rupees. These are available, which would help you to cut your caves in the desired shape. If you want to do any fancy cuttings, you have to make a V-shaped entry. So these clay tools would definitely help you to achieve that result. You would also need some amount of clay. So if you're using those wooden L-shaped and clamping them together, to seal the corners off, you can use this clay so that the plaster don't seep off. So this helps in filling those corners and making sure there is no leakage. And the last item I've just highlighted, that a kiln is needed. Now obviously these are expensive, you don't need to buy them, but just use Just Dial or your local phone directory and find out a local pottery store or a pottery studio. They would have the kiln services and they offer the baking services. So I generally make 100-200 caves, go to them and they would bake those caves and give it to me in a day or two. So just find out the kiln services in your area. They would charge very minimal amount for baking these clay items. So let's begin our plaster mold process. So first, keep the mold on flat surface. Make sure the surface is flat. The next step is add a glue or a clay at the bottom of the mold so that it stays sturdy and it won't move when you pour plaster on it. Keep one thing in mind, that the plaster is heavy, and if you are not making it sturdy, the mold, then these mold might move and you won't get the desired output. So apply release agent if you're not using clay or styrofoam. If you're using wood or metal or any such thing, apply release agent, or as I've shared earlier, use aluminum foil to cover your mold. Now bring all the 4 L wooden pieces together as shown here. Bring them together and clamp them tightly as shown here, so that they clamp together and the plaster won't flow out of that. So the next step is mix plaster with water. Use water as mentioned in your plaster packet. Ideally it's 50% ratio of water and 50% of plaster. and make this plaster solution. Then pour it on the mold. Make sure that you make around 1.5 to 2 inch layer on top of the mold. So pour it, and after pouring the plaster, tap on the sides, also on the bottom, that there is no air bubble trap. So if there is any air bubble, it would come out. So tap on the side. After that, let it dry for 1 to 2 hours. Then you can invert the wooden planks, remove the wooden planks. You can remove the side, and also remove the mold which is inside. You can pull that out. You can also pull the aluminum foil if you have used that. Do that, and you would see a hollow shape inside the plaster. Now keep this mold in outside, in outdoors, in sunny area. In my area, it generally takes 2 to 3 days for the plaster to get dry. Once it's dried, it becomes very light, and you can feel that it's bone dried. There is it's very dry. There is no water content in that. Then it's ready for the casting process. So with split molds, the process is slightly similar. So what we do is we make a clay surface, a clay kind of a box thing, and we place our mold in that. Around 50% of the mold should be inside the clay, and we make a clay surface. Again, apply a release agent on your mold as well as on the clay surface, and then as a next step, bring all the wooden L shape together, planks together, and clamp them tightly. As mentioned earlier, clamp them tightly that the plaster won't seep out. Mix plaster with water, again in the ratio as mentioned in the packet. Pour the plaster on the mold. Again, tap to remove if there are any air bubbles. And after some time, probably around, for the plaster what I use, it takes around 2 to 2.5 hours. I can take the wooden L-shaped planks outside. I remove the clamp, and then I take the plaster. And then you have to do the similar process for the other side, but in this time you have to use the first plaster as the base, keep the mold on top of it, and then make the other surface or the other side of the plaster. You make two plaster sides, and then as mentioned earlier, let it dry in the sun for a couple of days till it's bone dried. So these are wooden molds which I've used recently. The wooden L angles, the C clamps, so this is how you join the wooden planks and the C clamps, and in center you would place the mold. Pouring plaster on the mold. Once the plaster solidifies, removing the clamps and the mold. Showing an example of making a split mold here. So once the plaster dries, it's ready for clay casting. Here you can see a triangular cave mold. So example of a mold I have created using a small bucket. So this is a mold I have created using coconut shell and used for cichlids. Example of a split mold. So let's look at the next steps of making caves or casting using our plaster molds. So as a first step, take the plaster mold and keep it on a flat surface. Now take the powdered clay and mix it with water So now the question which would come in your mind is how much water should I add? So I would recommend add so much water that your solution should be thick and easy flowing, but it should not be dripping easily. So if I have to give an analogy, I would say it should be thick like a milkshake, a banana milkshake, but not like a orange fruit juice. So it should be thick. Now the next step would be you pour the solution inside the mold. Now what happens in the back end is the plaster starts sucking all the water and a layer of clay starts forming on the walls. After some time, because plaster is sucking water, your clay surface start receding. So then again refill the clay if it goes down. So once you have done pouring the clay, you'd see that the clay keep receding down. So how much time should you keep the clay inside the mold? It all depends upon how thick you want the cave to be. So the longer you keep the clay inside the mold, you would have thicker clay caves or the surface. The shorter time you keep it in the mold, you would have thinner caves. It's simple because the POP keeps absorbing the water and the structure or the wall structure keeps forming on the mold. So once you have got the desired thickness, you can pour out the excess clay and then place the mold inverted or in a slant position so that all the liquid excess clay can flow out and you would get a better smooth surface. So after some time you would observe that the clay starts separating from the plaster. You can clearly observe that. I would also be sharing a video in the next section on that. But once you observe that, and you can then invert the mold and tap on it and the cave would automatically come out. It would detach itself from POP and it would come out. So I generally have my molds a little longer, and once I get the desired output, I cut the front side and have the cave in the length what I desire. So in this way I would also get a fine finish from the entrance of the cave. After you have done this, I would say let the cave dry for couple of days. Once you observe that the clay is completely bone dried, there is no water or moisture in it, then as a last step I would use as a sandpaper and then polish the surface to get a very finished polished look. And again, this is more for visual representation. There is no importance of having a polished surface. Once this is done, the last step is baking the caves, so you can send the caves to the kiln services in your vicinity. So let's look at some actual videos. So you can see that you pour liquid clay in the mold. In some time the clay starts going down and you have to refill it at regular intervals. Kindly note, I am using both brown and white clay and making caves with this multiple colors. So you would see both of these examples in the video. So here you can see the clay has gone down and you can see the thickness of the cave. So if you want more thick, you would refill it again. If not, then you would stop here. As a next step, you would remove all the excessive clay which is there in the mold. And keep it inverted in slanting position. Here you can clearly see how thick the cave is. Now here you can see that as the clay starts drying, it starts getting separated from the plaster of Paris. So then you can remove that cave by tapping it from the mold, as you can see here in the video. So here you can see that I'm cutting the pleco caves as per the size I need, and I'm using the clay tools. So you would also observe that the surface here is rough because in this case I have used aluminium foil as the release agent, which have left its mark on the cave, but that's completely okay because this can be mitigated by using a sandpaper and polishing it and making the surface smooth. Similarly, I'm just taking a cichlid cave out of the mold and I'm using a bottle cap to make a hole in the cichlid cave for the fish to enter inside. And the last step is using a sandpaper to polish the caves, pleco caves as well as the cichlid caves, and give it a very finished look as you can see here. And let these dry for more till there is no moisture, and then you can send it to kiln for baking. Thank you for watching this video. I know this video has been a little lengthy, but I wanted to cover these topics in detail, so thanks a lot for watching it. Kindly do subscribe my channel and like this video. In future I'm planning to share more such videos on fish keeping and farming. I'd be sharing some reference links in the description as well as some important links and details in the description. Do check. Thank you.